vigil at the edge of the trees. Its gaze was fixed on the winding path ahead, braving the chill and silence. The animal's unwavering presence captivated Ranger Caleb when he finally uncovered the heartbreaking truth behind the horse's nightly watch. He was left in tears. What could drive such devotion and sorrow in this majestic creature? It was a crisp autumn evening, and the forest hummed with the whispers of rustling leaves and distant wildlife. Caleb Walker, a seasoned forest ranger with a deep love for nature, was making his rounds along the trail near the park's edge. He had always considered the forest his sanctuary, a place of peace and wonder. But that evening, something caught his eye, a solitary horse standing at the edge of the forest, silhouetted against the fading twilight. The horse's presence felt both serene and eerie. Its sleek coat gleamed faintly under the moonlight, and its posture, still and patient, seemed almost unnatural. Caleb slowed his steps, observing the creature. Why was it here, alone and unmoving at such a late hour? Curiosity piqued, Caleb approached cautiously, not wanting to startle the animal. The horse didn't flinch. Its large, expressive eyes remained fixed on the path leading deeper into the woods. The stillness of its gaze unsettled Caleb, yet it also stirred something within him, a sense of mystery and quiet sadness. Over the next few nights, Caleb noticed the horse in the same spot, its ritual unbroken. He began to linger at a distance, watching from the shadows. Each time, the horse stood firm, its focus unyielding, as if waiting for something or someone that never came. Unable to ignore the strange sight any longer, Caleb decided to take a closer look. He crouched near the forest's edge, speaking softly to the animal. "What are you waiting for, old friend?" he murmured. The horse shifted slightly, its ears twitching in recognition, but it didn't move. There was a story here, Caleb realized, one etched in the quiet determination of the horse's nightly vigil. And he couldn't shake the feeling that uncovering it would change everything he thought he knew about loyalty and loss. The following morning, Caleb couldn't shake the image of the horse standing vigil at the forest's edge. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through his cabin windows, he sipped his coffee, pondering the history. The horse's behavior wasn't just odd, it was purposeful. Caleb knew animals well enough to recognize when something was more than instinct. He decided to consult his colleague, Hannah, a local veterinarian who had worked closely with him on wildlife rescues in the area. She was someone Caleb trusted implicitly, not only for her expertise but for her empathy toward animals. Over lunch, Caleb shared the peculiar details of the past few nights. "It's always there, Hannah," he said, his voice a mix of curiosity and concern. "Same spot, same posture. It's like it's waiting for something, someone, maybe. But I've never seen a horse act like this," Hannah frowned, leaning back in her chair. "A horse staying in one place, especially at night, is unusual," she admitted. "Do you think it's a stray? Could it have been abandoned?" "I don't know," Caleb replied, shaking his head. "It doesn't seem malnourished or injured. Its coat is clean, and it's not skittish. But there's something in its eyes, like it's searching for something." Hannah thought for a moment before suggesting, "Maybe it's attached to someone or something in the forest. Animals have a way of forming bonds that run deeper than we understand." Intrigued by the idea, Caleb decided to observe the horse more closely. That evening, he packed a thermos of coffee, a blanket, and a notebook, determined to learn more about its behavior. As dusk settled over the forest, he set up a quiet perch near the edge of the woods, his binoculars trained on the horse. The horse arrived just as the last light of day faded. It walked with purpose, its head held high, and its tail swishing gently. Once again, it stopped at the exact same spot, staring into the forest. Caleb noted the precision of its routine. Every step seemed deliberate, as if guided by an invisible force. For hours, Caleb watched, jotting down observations. The horse didn't graze, didn't wander, didn't even appear restless. It stood as though time itself were irrelevant, its eyes locked on the shadowy path ahead. Around midnight, Caleb decided to approach, wrapping his blanket around his shoulders to shield against the chill. He moved quietly toward the horse. The animal turned its head slightly, acknowledging his presence but showing no fear. "You're not just lost, are you?" Caleb murmured, his voice low and soothing. "What are you looking for out here?" The horse let out a soft huff, its breath visible in the cold air. Caleb reached out tentatively, his hand brushing against its smooth coat. To his surprise, the horse didn't pull away. It stood still, allowing Caleb's touch, its calm demeanor almost unnerving. He noticed something unusual, a small leather strap still attached to the horse's neck, frayed and weathered with age. It was a remnant of a halter, but no tag or identification was visible. Caleb's curiosity deepened. The next morning, Caleb returned to town and began asking around. He visited nearby farms, spoke to locals at the general store, and even left a notice on the community board. "Anyone missing a horse?" he asked repeatedly, but every answer was the same, a puzzled shake of the head. "You're chasing a ghost, Caleb," one old farmer chuckled. "If no one's claimed it by now, it probably doesn't belong to anyone around here." But Caleb wasn't convinced. The horse's condition and its behavior suggested a deeper story. Someone, somewhere, had to know more. As the days passed, Caleb's connection to the horse grew. He started bringing it food, fresh apples and carrots, and spent time talking to it, sharing his thoughts and theories aloud. "You've got a story, don't you?" he'd say, watching the horse's ears flicker as if listening. "I'm going to figure it out." One evening, as Caleb sat beside the horse at the forest's edge, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. On the ground near the horse's hooves lay a faint trail of disturbed leaves leading deeper into the woods. The path was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Caleb's pulse quickened. "Is this what you've been watching?" he asked the horse. The horse snorted softly, a sound Caleb took as confirmation. Gripping his flashlight, he stood and prepared to follow the trail. He turned to the horse one last time. "Stay here, okay? I'll figure out what you're guarding." The horse didn't move, its gaze unwavering as Caleb stepped into the shadows of the forest. The trail Caleb followed was faint but undeniable, weaving through the dense underbrush of the forest. The air was cooler here, heavy with the earthy scent of moss and damp leaves. Caleb's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing gnarled roots and low-hanging branches that snagged at his coat. Every few steps, he glanced over his shoulder. Even though the horse had stayed behind, Caleb felt its presence like a silent guide, urging him forward. The deeper he ventured, the more peculiar the forest became. The usual symphony of nighttime creatures, chirping crickets, hooting owls, was absent. In its place was an eerie stillness, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. After what felt like an hour, Caleb stumbled upon something unexpected, a small clearing illuminated by the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the canopy. At the center stood the remnants of a wooden structure, weathered and overtaken by nature. Vines snaked around broken beams, and moss coated what remained of the roof. "What is this place?" Caleb muttered, stepping closer. As he examined the ruins, something caught his eye, a scattering of items on the ground near the structure's entrance. He crouched down, his flashlight revealing a child's toy, a carved wooden horse, its paint faded but still visible. Beside it lay a rusted tin box, its lid slightly ajar. Caleb's hands trembled as he opened the box. Inside were photographs, their edges yellowed with age. The images were grainy but clear enough to reveal a young boy standing beside a horse. Caleb's breath caught. The horse in the photo bore an uncanny resemblance to the one waiting at the forest's edge. "This can't be a coincidence," he murmured, flipping through the photos. Each one told a story, a bond between the boy and the horse captured in moments of joy and adventure. A folded piece of paper at the bottom of the box drew Caleb's attention. Unfolding it carefully, he found a handwritten note. Its ink was smudged but still legible. "To anyone who finds this, please take care of my friend. She means everything to me." The words sent a chill down Caleb's spine. The letter was dated over 2 decades ago. Caleb stood, scanning the clearing for more clues. His flashlight beam fell upon a makeshift grave marker, a simple wooden cross embedded in the ground, its surface etched with a single word, Evelyn. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. The horse wasn't just waiting, it was mourning. This clearing, this ruined structure, wasn't random. It was a place of deep significance, a connection to a past that had been all but forgotten. Before Caleb could process further, a sudden sound broke the silence, a rustling in the underbrush behind him. He whirled around, heart pounding. His flashlight illuminated 2 glowing eyes peering at him from the darkness. A coyote stepped into view, its lean frame and sharp teeth glinting in the light. Caleb froze, his mind racing. Coyotes weren't typically aggressive toward humans, but this one seemed different, its posture low and tense, its gaze locked on Caleb. Slowly, Caleb began to back away, keeping his flashlight trained on the animal. But as he moved, he heard more rustling. Another coyote emerged, then another. "Great," Caleb muttered under his breath, gripping a sturdy branch he'd picked up earlier. This was just what he needed. The coyotes began to circle him, their movements calculated and deliberate. Caleb's mind raced. He couldn't outrun them, not in the dense forest. He needed a plan. Suddenly, a sharp, commanding whinny echoed through the trees. The sound was unmistakable, the horse. The coyotes froze, their ears swiveling toward the noise. Caleb seized the moment to shout and wave his flashlight, making himself appear larger. The combination of his movements and the horse's presence seemed to rattle the predators. One by one, they slunk back into the shadows, their glowing eyes disappearing into the darkness. Relieved but shaken, Caleb sprinted back toward the forest's edge. When he emerged from the trees, the horse was there, standing as still as a sentinel. Its eyes met Caleb's, and for a brief moment, he felt as though the animal understood everything that had just happened. "You saved me," Caleb said, his voice hoarse. He reached out to stroke the horse's mane, gratitude swelling in his chest. "But why? What brought you to that place?" The horse didn't move, its gaze fixed on Caleb with quiet intensity. That night, Caleb returned home with more questions than answers. He spread the photos and the letter across his kitchen table, studying each one as if they held the key to the mystery. The story was becoming clearer. The horse had belonged to someone deeply connected to the clearing, a boy who had loved it enough to leave behind a heartfelt plea for its care. But what had happened to the boy? Why had the horse returned after all these years? Caleb knew he couldn't stop now. The horse's loyalty and resilience deserved answers. He resolved to dig deeper, starting with the local archives. If there was a record of the boy, the structure, or the grave, he would find it. The following morning, Caleb awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The images of the ruined clearing, the photographs, and the haunting note were etched in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that the horse was depending on him to uncover the truth. As he sipped his coffee, Caleb laid out the photos and the letter again, scrutinizing every detail. The boy's youthful face in the pictures bore a striking resemblance to someone Caleb thought he'd seen before, but he couldn't place where. The note, though brief, hinted at a bond that transcended time, and the grave marker with the name Evelyn carried a sorrowful weight. He decided to start at the local archives. If anyone had records about the structure in the forest or its occupants, it would be the town's historical society. Packing the photos and the letter in his bag, Caleb headed out, his resolve unshaken despite the biting morning chill. At the archives, an elderly librarian named Mrs. Hargrove greeted him warmly. "You're up early, Caleb," she said with a smile. "What brings you here today?" "I need to look up some records," Caleb replied, placing the photographs and letter on the counter. "Do you know anything about a family that might have lived near the forest edge? There was a structure there, a cabin or something, and this horse seems tied to it all." Mrs. Hargrove's brows knitted as she examined the photos. This looks familiar," she murmured, adjusting her glasses. "That area hasn't been inhabited for decades, but there was a family." She shuffled to a nearby shelf, pulling out a thick ledger marked with fading gold lettering. After flipping through several pages, she stopped, her finger tracing a line of text. "Here it is," she said, her voice tinged with melancholy. "The Langfords. They lived on the edge of the forest in a small cabin. The boy in these photos, that must be their son, Jacob Langford." "Jacob Langford," Caleb repeated, the name ringing faintly familiar. "What happened to them?" Mrs. Hargrove's expression darkened. "Tragedy," she said softly. "Jacob's mother, Evelyn, passed away from an illness when he was very young. After her death, his father, Samuel, struggled to keep things together. The boy and his horse were inseparable, everybody in town knew about their bond. But one day, when Jacob was about 10, he disappeared. His father claimed he went looking for help, but he never came back." A chill ran down Caleb's spine. The clearing, the grave marker, the horse, it all began to make sense. "Do you think the horse I found could be the same one?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes widened. "If it is, then it's a miracle. That horse would have to be decades old. But animals can have extraordinary memories, Caleb. Maybe it's come back for closure, or to honor the bond it shared with that boy." The gravity of her words settled over Caleb. He thanked Mrs. Hargrove and copied down everything she had on the Langfords. There wasn't much, but it was enough to fuel his next step. Later that day, Caleb returned to the forest with a plan. Armed with the new information, he aimed to piece together the events that had unfolded decades ago. The horse, as always, was waiting at the forest's edge, its calm demeanor unwavering. "Let's find out what happened, girl," Caleb said, patting the horse gently. Together, they retraced the trail to the clearing. This time, Caleb searched every corner of the ruins, hoping to uncover something he'd missed the night before. Near the remnants of the hearth, he found a small tin buried beneath the ash. Inside was a single photograph, its edges charred but the image still visible. Jacob standing beside his horse in front of the cabin, holding a carved wooden figure, an exact replica of the horse. Caleb's chest tightened. This wasn't just a random animal. The horse had been Jacob's lifeline, his companion through unimaginable grief. But why had the horse returned now, after so many years? As the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb made his way back to town, the horse trailing close behind. He stopped by Mrs. Hargrove's house to show her the newly discovered photograph. "This confirms it," Mrs. Hargrove said, her voice trembling with emotion. "That horse is a living piece of history. It's carrying Jacob's memory, his love, even after all this time." Caleb nodded, his determination hardening. "I need to find out what happened to Jacob," he said. "Maybe the horse is waiting for someone to finally bring closure to its story." Mrs. Hargrove gave him a reassuring smile. "You're on the right path, Caleb. Trust the horse. It seems to know more than we ever could." That night, Caleb couldn't sleep, and the weight of the mystery pressed heavily on him. He sat by his window, staring out at the starlit sky. The horse was visible at the edge of his property, standing motionless, as though guarding something sacred. The next day, Caleb resolved to visit one more place that might hold answers, the remnants of the Langford family's gravestones at the town cemetery. He hoped to find more clues or perhaps even Jacob's final resting place. The morning dawned with a gray, overcast sky, mirroring Caleb's deepening curiosity and unease. After a restless night, he gathered his notes, photographs, and the tin with the charred picture. Today, he was determined to visit the Langford family graves at the town cemetery. He needed to uncover more about their story, hoping it might illuminate why the horse remained steadfast at the forest's edge. The horse was waiting, as usual, when Caleb stepped outside. Its calm presence was now oddly reassuring, as if it had chosen him as its partner in this journey. "You coming with me?" Caleb asked with a small smile, patting its neck. The horse nickered softly, nudging his arm. "All right, let's go." The cemetery was on the outskirts of town, a quiet, somber place where time seemed to stand still. Rows of weathered headstones stretched out beneath towering oaks, some nearly illegible from years of erosion. Caleb led the horse to the caretaker's office, tethering it gently outside before stepping inside. "Morning, Caleb," greeted the elderly caretaker, Mr. Dawson, who looked up from his crossword puzzle. "I'm looking for the graves of the Langford family. Do you know where they might be?" Mr. Dawson scratched his head thoughtfully. "Langford, you say? That's going back. Let me check the records." He shuffled to a filing cabinet and pulled out an old ledger, flipping through the yellowed pages. "Here we are. Evelyn Langford, buried in lot 23B. But there's no record of Jacob or Samuel." Caleb frowned. "So only Evelyn has a grave." "That's what the records show," Mr. Dawson replied. "It's not uncommon. Sometimes families move away, and the rest are buried elsewhere, or not at all." Armed with the plot number, Caleb made his way to 23B. The gravestone was simple and unadorned, the name Evelyn Langford carved into the weathered stone alongside her birth and death years. Placed neatly beside the marker was a small bundle of dried wildflowers, tied with a ribbon. Caleb knelt, brushing away the leaves that had settled around the base. The sight of the flowers struck him as odd. "Who's been visiting you, Evelyn?" he murmured. Someone had been here recently, perhaps someone who knew more about the family's fate. As Caleb pondered, the sound of footsteps approached. Turning, he saw a young woman carrying a small bouquet of fresh flowers. She stopped abruptly, surprised to see him. I didn't expect anyone else to be here," she said hesitantly, glancing at the horse tethered nearby. "Are you visiting Evelyn too?" "Yes," Caleb replied, standing and brushing dirt from his hands. "I'm trying to learn more about her and her family. Do you know her?" The woman hesitated, clutching the flowers tightly. "She was my great-aunt. My grandmother used to tell me stories about her, and about Jacob." Caleb's heart quickened. "I've been trying to piece together their story. Do you know what happened to Jacob or his father?" She sighed, lowering her gaze. "Not much, just bits and pieces my grandmother shared. She always said Jacob was a kind, quiet boy who adored his horse. But when Evelyn passed, everything fell apart. Samuel wasn't the same after losing her. My grandmother believed Jacob went into the forest searching for something, maybe to find help, maybe to escape. He never came back. Do you think Samuel might have buried Jacob somewhere in the forest?" Caleb asked. She shook her head. "If he did, no one ever found him. Samuel disappeared not long after Jacob. It's like they both vanished into thin air." The conversation left Caleb with more questions than answers. Thanking the woman, he returned to the horse, which nudged him gently as he untied it. "Well, that didn't give us much, did it?" he muttered. The horse flicked its ears, as if disagreeing. As Caleb walked back through town, he noticed a man watching him from the doorway of a small antique shop. The man's piercing gaze sent a chill down Caleb's spine. He looked away, but when he glanced back, the man was gone. The encounter left Caleb uneasy. Who was that man, and why had he been watching him so intently? The forest, the ruins, the grave, all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle that refused to come together. Later that day, Caleb decided to return to the forest. He couldn't shake the feeling that the answers lay somewhere within its depths. This time, he brought a metal detector, hoping to uncover anything buried beneath the soil. The horse followed him closely as he retraced his steps to the clearing. The ruins felt different now, heavier, as though the air itself carried the weight of untold stories. Caleb swept the detector over the ground near the hearth. The device emitted a faint beep. Digging carefully, he unearthed a rusted tin box, its hinges barely holding together. Inside were small trinkets, a child's wooden carving of a horse, a faded drawing of a family beneath a tree, and a tarnished locket. Caleb opened the locket to find a tiny photo of Evelyn, her gentle smile frozen in time. As he examined the items, the horse let out a soft, mournful whinny. Caleb looked up to see it standing at the edge of the clearing, staring into the dense woods. Its ears were pricked, its body tense. "What is it, girl?" Caleb asked, his voice low. The horse pawed at the ground, then took a few tentative steps forward, its gaze fixed on something Caleb couldn't see. Heart pounding, Caleb followed. The forest seemed darker, the trees closing in as he ventured deeper. The horse led him to a small clearing he hadn't seen before. At its center was a single moss-covered stone, barely visible among the undergrowth. Carved into the stone were two words, Jacob Langford. Caleb's breath caught. The grave wasn't marked on any maps, and no one had mentioned it. Who had buried Jacob here, and why had the horse brought him to this spot? Now, Caleb stood frozen before the moss-covered stone, his mind racing. The grave was unmarked on any records, and its location, deep in the forest, suggested a hurried burial. The horse remained by his side, its steady gaze on the grave, a silent testament to the bond it had with the boy who now lay beneath the earth. Kneeling, Caleb ran his fingers over the faint carving, Jacob Langford. Questions swirled in his mind. Who had buried Jacob here, and why did the horse, decades later, still seem connected to this place? The horse let out a soft snort, nudging Caleb's shoulder. He looked up into its expressive eyes, which seemed to plead with him, as though urging him to uncover more. "You've been trying to tell me something all along, haven't you?" Caleb murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "But what am I missing?" Caleb carefully examined the area around the grave. There were no other markers, no remnants of a memorial. Whoever had buried Jacob had done so with urgency but not without care. The ground beneath the stone was packed tightly, as if the grave had been tended to over time. The thought sent a chill through Caleb. Was someone still visiting this place after all these years? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of snapping twigs behind him. Whirling around, he caught sight of the man from the antique shop. The stranger stepped out from the shadows, his weathered face etched with an unreadable expression. "You found it," the man said, his voice low and grave. "Jacob's resting place." Caleb instinctively positioned himself between the man and the horse, unsure of the stranger's intentions. "Who are you?" he demanded. "How do you know about this?" The man took a step closer, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "My name's Walter. My grandfather worked for the Langfords. I've heard the stories my whole life." Caleb frowned, suspicion warring with curiosity. "If you know so much, why haven't you come forward? Why let this boy's story remain hidden?" Walter sighed, his gaze dropping to the grave. "Because some wounds are too deep to expose," he said quietly. "But it seems the past doesn't want to stay buried anymore." "Why did Jacob end up here?" Caleb pressed. "And what happened to Samuel?" Walter hesitated, his weathered face creased with pain. "Samuel blamed himself for Evelyn's death. She fell ill, and he couldn't save her. After she passed, he spiraled, became obsessed with protecting Jacob, fearing he'd lose him too. But his paranoia drove them into isolation." Caleb listened intently, his heart heavy. "And Jacob?" Walter's voice cracked as he continued. "One night, there was a fire at their cabin. Samuel managed to save Jacob and the horse, but he was injured in the process. He told my grandfather that Jacob wandered into the forest soon after, searching for help, but he never returned." Why didn't Samuel go after him? Caleb asked, anger flickering in his chest. He tried, Walter said, his voice barely above a whisper. But his injuries were severe, and by the time he was strong enough, it was too late. When Samuel finally found Jacob, he buried him here, to be close to the forest they both loved. Samuel never forgave himself. He disappeared not long after, leaving only the horse behind. The weight of Walter's words settled over Caleb like a heavy fog. He looked at the horse, who stood silently by the grave, its head bowed as if in mourning. And the horse? Caleb asked. Walter's eyes softened. It stayed near the forest, waiting for Samuel to return. Over time, it became a local legend. People said the horse was guarding Jacob's grave, refusing to leave until the family was reunited. But this isn't the same horse, Caleb said, gesturing to the animal. How can it remember all this? Walter's expression turned enigmatic. It's not about memory. It's about loyalty. That horse, whether it's the same one or another, carries the spirit of Jacob's bond. Animals don't forget love the way people do. Caleb struggled to process the revelation. The horse's nightly vigil, its insistence on leading him here, it all made sense now. But it left him with a deep sense of sorrow. This boy's life ended too soon, he said softly. And his story deserves to be told. Walter nodded. That's why I followed you. I saw you uncover the photo at the ruins. I knew you wouldn't stop until you found the truth. Maybe it's time for this story to be shared. They stood in silence for a moment, the forest around them eerily quiet. Finally, Caleb spoke. There's more to this, isn't there? Something we're still missing? Walter's gaze grew distant. Maybe. Or maybe it's just the weight of the past calling us to make peace with it. As Caleb and Walter began their walk back to town, the horse lingered by the grave, refusing to leave. Caleb stopped and turned back, his heart aching. It's okay, he whispered. We'll keep Jacob's memory alive. The horse finally followed, its movements slow and deliberate, as if it understood the gravity of the moment. For the first time, Caleb felt a profound connection, not just to the animal but to the story it carried. The walk back to town was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Caleb and Walter exchanged few words, the enormity of what they had uncovered weighed on them. The horse, though obediently following Caleb, seemed reluctant, its pace slower than usual. It paused occasionally, glancing back toward the forest, as if drawn to the grave they had just left behind. Caleb felt the pull too. There was something unresolved, something elusive that hovered just out of reach. Walter, he began, breaking the silence. If Samuel disappeared, where did he go? And why did no one ever find him? Walter sighed, his brow furrowing. That's the mystery, isn't it? Some folks said he couldn't bear the guilt and took his own life. Others claimed he left to start over somewhere far away. But no one knows for sure. Caleb shook his head. It doesn't sit right with me. He loved Jacob so much, enough to risk everything for him. Why would he just leave the grave and the horse behind? Walter's expression darkened. I've asked myself the same thing. My grandfather said Samuel was a broken man when he buried Jacob. Maybe he felt he had no place in this world anymore. The horse let out a soft whinny, drawing Caleb's attention. It had stopped again, standing still as a statue in the middle of the path. Caleb approached it, placing a reassuring hand on its neck. What is it, boy? Are we missing something? The horse's ears twitched, and it turned its head slightly, as if pointing toward a cluster of trees off the path. Caleb frowned. Walter, did you ever explore beyond Jacob's grave? Walter hesitated. Not really. We always thought the grave was the end of the story. Caleb felt a surge of determination. Maybe it's not. Without waiting for a response, Caleb veered off the path. The horse eagerly followed, while Walter reluctantly trailed behind, grumbling about the lateness of the hour. The trees grew denser, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the fading sunlight. The air grew colder, the forest floor crunching beneath their boots. They walked in silence until they came upon a clearing. At its center stood the ruins of what appeared to be another structure, its crumbled walls overtaken by moss and vines. Caleb's heart raced as he approached. The eerie stillness of the place was unsettling yet compelling. What is this? Walter asked, his voice low. Caleb knelt by a fallen beam, brushing away dirt and leaves. Beneath the debris, he uncovered an old wooden chest, its surface weathered but intact. The horse nuzzled Caleb's shoulder, as though encouraging him to open it. With trembling hands, Caleb pried wide open the lid. Inside were faded letters, a photograph of Samuel and Jacob, and a small tarnished locket. Caleb carefully picked up the locket, his fingers grazing its delicate engraving. "For Jacob, with love, Mama." He handed the locket to Walter, who examined it with a mix of awe and sadness. "This must have been Evelyn's," Walter said. "Jacob must have carried it with him." Caleb turned his attention to the letters, which were brittle with age. He unfolded one, the ink smudged but still legible. The letter was addressed to Samuel, and the contents made Caleb's blood run cold. "Samuel, they're coming for us. They think we're cursed. That the misfortunes aren't natural. I don't know how much longer we can stay here. Keep Jacob safe." Caleb's voice faltered as he read the letter aloud. "Cursed? What did she mean?" Walter's face turned pale. There were rumors back then, superstitions about the Langfords. People said their land was cursed, that anyone who stayed too long would meet tragedy, fires, sickness, accidents. They blamed it all on the family. Caleb's mind raced, connecting the pieces. "You think the townsfolk drove them into isolation? That they let Samuel bury Jacob here and disappear because they were afraid?" Walter nodded grimly. It wouldn't be the first time fear made people cruel. Caleb clenched his fists, anger rising in his chest. They didn't just abandon them, they erased them, pretended they never existed. The horse whinnied again, louder this time, snapping Caleb out of his thoughts. It pawed at the ground, its actions urgent. Caleb glanced at Walter, who shrugged. "Looks like he's not done showing us things." Together, they followed the horse to the far edge of the clearing, where the remains of a stone well stood, its wooden cover rotted away. Caleb peered inside, but the darkness was impenetrable. Walter handed him a flashlight, and Caleb shone it into the depths. The beam illuminated a small, rusted object wedged between the stones. Caleb used a branch to fish it out, revealing an old revolver. His stomach churned as he examined it. "Do you think this was Samuel's?" Walter's voice was grave. "If it was, then maybe this well holds more than just water." The discovery deepened the mystery and left Caleb with more questions than answers. As night fell, they decided to return to town and regroup. But the tension between them was palpable. "We'll come back," Caleb said firmly, his gaze lingering on the well. "There's more to this story. I can feel it." Walter nodded, but his eyes betrayed his unease. "Be careful, Caleb. Some truths are better left buried." As they walked back under the cover of darkness, the forest seemed alive with whispers, as though it too held secrets it wasn't ready to share. Caleb tightened his grip on the horse's reins, his resolve unshaken. He had come too far to stop now. Back in town, the discovery at the ruins weighed heavily on Caleb. He couldn't shake the eerie feeling of the forest, the unearthed letters, or the revolver from the well. As he walked the horse back to the stable, he felt its restless energy, as if it too was affected by the day's revelations. The stable master, a wiry old man named Gus, noticed Caleb's unease as he led the horse into its stall. "That fella giving you trouble?" Gus asked, nodding toward the horse, which pawed at the ground anxiously. "Not trouble," Caleb replied, stroking the horse's neck. "It's like he's trying to tell me something." Gus leaned against the stable door, his weathered face thoughtful. "Animals know things, boy. They feel what we can't see. This one's been waiting for years. There's something in that forest he hasn't let go of." Caleb hesitated before speaking. "Do you know anything about Samuel Langford or his family?" Gus's eyes narrowed, and he spat into the straw. "The Langfords? You've been digging where you shouldn't." "I found his son's grave," Caleb admitted. "And a letter. There's more to their story, isn't there?" Gus sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his thinning hair. "A sad tale, that one. Folks in this town turned their backs on the Langfords when they needed help most. Called them cursed. Said their bad luck would spread. But it wasn't a curse, son. It was people being cruel. Why didn't anyone go looking for Samuel after Jacob's death?" Caleb asked, frustration evident in his voice. "Because they didn't want to find him," Gus said bluntly. "It was easier to pretend the Langfords never existed." Caleb clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. But why would Samuel vanish without a trace? What was he so afraid of? Gus hesitated, as though debating whether to share more. Finally, he lowered his voice. "There's talk, old talk, that Samuel found something out there in the woods. Something that scared him enough to stay away from town. Folks say he saw things that shouldn't be seen." "What kind of things?" Caleb pressed. Gus shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe it was the guilt. Maybe it was something else. All I know is he took his secrets to the grave. Caleb left the stable more determined than ever. The town's silence about the Langfords wasn't just a matter of neglect, it was a willful erasure. He couldn't let their story end like this. The next morning, Caleb met Walter at the diner. Over steaming cups of coffee, they pored over the letters and the items from the chest. The locket and photograph lay between them, silent witnesses to a tragedy that had been buried for decades. "What's our next move?" Walter asked, his voice low. "We need to find out more about Evelyn," Caleb said. "If she wrote those letters, she might have left other clues." Walter nodded. "There's an archive at the library, old property records, obituaries, stuff like that. We might find something there." They spent the afternoon combing through brittle papers and faded photographs. The Langford name appeared sporadically: property deeds, a marriage license for Samuel and Evelyn, and a sparse obituary for Jacob. But what caught Caleb's eye was a single handwritten note tucked inside one of the records. It was dated the day after Jacob's death. The handwriting was shaky, but